Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, an episode on the small Australian political parties. So I'm sure most of you already know, but I did an episode on the large federally represented parties of Australia. This included the Liberal Party, the National Party, the Liberal National Party of Queensland, the Country Liberal Party, the Labour Party, the Greens, the Centre Alliance, Bob Cater's Australian Party, One Nation, and the Jackie Lambie Network. If you want to learn more about those parties or the role in Parliament, then I suggest you go check it out. I'll put a link in the description or the video or whatever. But for this episode, I will talk about 11 smaller parties who are not represented at the federal level, but have at least one seat in one of Australia's states' parliaments. Australia, being a federation, has a significant amount of autonomy given to their states and territories, with each state and territory having its own state government and parliament. These will then deal with state laws and regulations. While the large federal parties tend to dominate these state parliaments, you can also find plenty of small, colorful parties who try to represent their own small subsect of that state's population. For this episode, I'll go through them based on which ones are represented in the most state parliaments, from largest to smallest. Priority will be given to parties that are represented in more populous states. But before we go to the state parties, there is one federal party I want to talk about, the Rex Patrick team. This party was formed a couple months after my first video was released, so I'll talk about it here. Rex Patrick team is essentially a vehicle for Senator from South Australia, Rex Patrick, to get elected. Patrick was at first elected to the Senate running under the Centre Alliance banner. However, he left the party in 2020 and formed the Rex Patrick team to help improve his chances of re-election in the next federal election. Patrick is generally kind of a centre populist. He supports increased government transparency and, in his words, keeping the bastards honest. He also wants to protect South Australian industries and manufacturing from moving outside the state, is opposed to the People's Republic of China, backs increased environmental regulations, and once went into Australian Parliament dressed as a submarine. So there's that. Now to the first state party. We have the Shooters, Fishers, and Farmers Party. The party seeks to represent people who have guns, people who fish, and people who farm. I know, shocking considering the name, right? The party is ideologically conservative and right-wing populist, often competing with the more mainstream National Party for rural votes. The party has 3 seats in the New South Wales Legislative Assembly, 2 seats in the New South Wales Legislative Council, 1 seat in the Victorian Legislative Council, and finally 1 more seat in the Western Australian Legislative Council. The party is currently led by Robert Borsak, a member of the New South Wales Legislative Council. The party's policies tend to be focused on the issues affecting the 3 main groups it references in its name. It was originally formed to fight gun control laws in Australia, which are fairly strict, at least according to American gun laws, to my understanding. It seeks to remove many of the restrictions the country has in place regarding owning a firearm, along with making it easier to hunt and fish. Its rural policies are mainly around limiting government restrictions around farmers, while also encouraging subsidies and growth in the farming, mining, forestry, and taxi industry. It also wants to reduce bureaucratic and environmental regulations in these industries, and set up a single water management agency. Finally, I just want to say that the logo of the party shows a guy fishing, a guy shooting at something, and a guy walking his dog, which I assume represents a farmer. It also then has the party name, the Shooters, Fishers, and Farmers Party, but the 3 bases of support don't line up with the 3 men in the logo. It bothers me whenever I look at it, and just on the off chance that an official in the party is listening to this, I'm asking you to change it so the 3 bases line up with the 3 guys. If you don't, well, I'll probably do nothing, but it'd be pretty sick if you could change it. So next, we have the Animal Justice Party. This party represents animal rights activists and ideologically is environmentalist. The party has 2 seats in the New South Wales Legislative Council and 1 seat in the Victorian Legislative Council. The party is headed by Bruce Poon, a project manager and animal rights activist from Victoria. The party is focused primarily on issues involving animals. It wants to reduce the amount of meat Australians consume, wants to end experimental testing on animals, wants to put more restrictions on zoos, and wants to reduce the amount of hunting and fishing going on in the country. It also promotes environmentalist views, such as implementing carbon taxes, reducing the ecological footprint of the average Australian, and wants to preserve natural environments in Australia, such as the Great Barrier Reef. The party does have a small focus on what it calls human issues. They do, however, try to tie these issues such as education, mental health, and international security back into animal rights, such as transitioning farmers away from the meat industry, increasing the funding of mental health services that utilize animals, and cracking down on international poachers. Also, on the party's website, it shows a soccer player hitting a kangaroo in the face with a soccer ball and killing him. It was just the craziest ad I've ever seen. Next, we go to Derryn Hinch's Justice Party. The party is based around the ideas and policies of party leader, former Victorian senator, and Australian radio and TV personality, Derryn Hinch. Hinch's party is focused mainly on the justice system, in particular, punishing criminals and promoting tough-on-crime laws. It mainly tends to argue for harsher punishments around pedophiles, domestic abusers, and other violent criminals. It gets most of its support from older voters. Hinch is famous in Australia for publicly exposing pedophiles in the country, which has landed Hinch in jail several times. It has 2 seats in the Legislative Council of Victoria. The party is focused on cracking down on crime. It wants to make it tougher to get parole and bail, wants to create a convicted sex offender registrar, and give out longer and tougher sentences for violent crimes. It also wants to crack down on animal and domestic abuse, supports legalized euthanasia, wants to improve veteran benefits, and wants to increase funding to rail lines. It also should be noted that Hinch, the anti-pedophile activist, once randomly decided to admit that he slept with a girl he thought was 25, but then later she revealed to him she was actually 15, and then later admitted to being 17 and a half. Why did he do this, you ask? I don't know. Australians confuse me. Next, we have the Liberal Democrat Party. The party is ideologically libertarian and classically liberal. It tends to represent small business owners and those upset with high taxes or strict regulations. It tries to pull off the infuriating libertarian tactic of pretending to be centrist when, in reality, its policies and support base usually leans right. The party has 2 seats in the Legislative Council of Victoria. It is headed by Lloyd Russell, a small business owner and activist from Queensland. The Liberal Democrats are very supportive of the free market. They want to try and reduce regulations across the board, promote privatization, and limit government spending and taxes, believing the free market will lead to a better economy. It is also fairly liberal on social issues, believing it isn't the government's place to dictate what happens in people's lives, meaning it opposes gun control, supports drug and euthanasia legalization, and is opposed to political censorship, or what it calls SJWs. It also backs increasing the power for states in Australia, wants an end to foreign aid, wants to reduce barriers to immigration, and wants to introduce cuts to welfare, education, and health services. Now we go to the Christian Democratic Party. The party is ideologically Christian democratic and socially conservative, with it promoting traditional family roles in society. It is mainly backed by conservative Protestants in the suburbs, but also receives some support from more conservative Catholics and Orthodox Christians, and sees some support in rural and urban areas. It has 1 seat in the New South Wales Legislative Council, which is controlled by current head of the party and Congregationalist minister, Fred Nile. The party is mainly focused on social issues, promoting a very strict traditionalist view on the family. It opposes homosexuality, regularly accusing LGBT activists of promoting the gay agenda and trying to recruit the youth. It wants to try and halt the number of atheists, Muslims, and pagans coming into the country, or converting to those new belief systems. It is pro-life, wants to reduce gambling, believes in criminal rehabilitation when possible, wants to increase access to healthcare and welfare, and wants to remove what it calls gender ideologies in school. The Christian Democrats also have very recently suffered from political infighting, with Nile at one point being unable to enter party headquarters, because the party board changed the locks to the party headquarters after the party's treasurer accused him of pocketing funds from the party. Whether or not he did or didn't, I think it's kind of pretty funny. I just like to imagine Nile looked like George Bush when he was trying to open that door after that press conference. Now, to the opposite end of the social spectrum, we have the Reason Party. The party was a merger of the Australian Sex Party and the Australian Cyclist Party. That's right, Australia had a party all about bicyclist interest, easily some of the most pressing matters in domestic policy. The Reason Party is very socially progressive, seeking to appeal to the urban population, sex workers, sexual minorities, and young people. It holds 1 seat in the Legislative Council of Victoria, which is controlled by party leader and former CEO of a pornographic film company, Fiona Patten. The party wants to decriminalize drug use and sex work, believing the government has no role in regulating morality. It also wants to fight against discrimination, create a Minister of Fashion for the Victorian state government, lower both taxes and the cost of housing, wants to reduce homelessness and drug addiction by social programs, and remove tax exemptions from most religious institutions. Also, throwing a bone to the good old Cyclist Party, it wants to improve cycling lanes and create new ones, and provide bike racks in buses and trams. Next, we have the Sustainable Australia Party. The party is, as the name would suggest, focused on making Australia more sustainable, and is focused mainly on environmental issues. But it doesn't lean as far left as the Greens do. The party has one seat in the Victorian Legislative Council. It is headed by William Burke, the founder of the party and businessman from New South Wales. The party is very concerned about overdevelopment in the country. It wants to build more protected animal habitats, phase out the fossil fuel industry in favor of solar, hydroelectric, and wind power, and wants to reduce the amount of new land being used in the country. It favors local control to help regulate housing and land issues, wants to give more protections to Indigenous Australians' arts and culture, and wants to crack down on corruption. It also stands out from other environmentalist groups by strongly opposing increased immigration into the country. It wants to reduce immigration to help prevent rapid population growth, along with subsidizing Australian industries over imports and increasing the number of police officers. Next, we go to my favorite of the parties I'm going to talk about. Not necessarily because I'd vote for them or I agree with them on everything, but more just what they were formed to do is so unique. I've honestly never seen any other party like it gain any sort of political office, and it's just so interesting. The Transport Matters Party was formed to represent taxi drivers and prevent Uber from taking over the vehicle for hire industry in Victoria. Ideologically, they lean slightly left, although they pretty much only talk about transportation issues on their website. The party has one seat in the Legislative Council of Victoria, where the party leader and former taxi driver, Rod Barton, sits. The party is mainly focused on improving the conditions for taxi drivers, and wants to improve their income, exempt drivers from tolls, prevent Uber from coming to Victoria and ultimately disrupting the taxi industry, and build up a more sustainable, energy-efficient fleet of taxis. Their website also talks about improving road maintenance, reducing the cost of public transportation, while also finding ways to improve the public transportation, rural, and rail infrastructure in the state. In terms of non-transportation matters, it believes in increasing affordable housing and social services to prevent homelessness, wants improved waste management, and wants more protected animal habitats and wetlands. For the next party, I just want you to guess what they're going to advocate for. It is called the Legalize Cannabis Western Australian Party. Okay, think long and hard on what they're focused around. It's not going to be easy to guess, so I'll also inform you that it is an affiliate of the Help End Marijuana Prohibition Party, or PEMP Party. Okay, take your time thinking it out. If you guess that it's all about legalizing marijuana, you would be right. They just recently won one seat in the Western Australian Legislative Council. The party is currently headed by Leo Treasure, an electronic music artist going by the name Bitcoin DJ. The party was formed to legalize marijuana in Western Australia. Apparently, according to their website, issues regarding the rules and regulations around marijuana have to be formed at the state level. Therefore, the party decided to contest elections in the state parliament, campaigning around the subject. The party on its website talks exclusively about issues regarding marijuana, hoping to make marijuana legal for medical, textile, manufacturing, and recreational use, while also expunging the criminal records of anyone with marijuana-related offenses, and build up a marijuana industry in the state. Speaking of Western Australia, I want to talk about the National Party branch in Western Australia. You may remember from my last video, or just already know, that the National Party is a rural conservative party, closely aligned with the Liberal Party of Australia, the main conservative party in the country. The Nationals in Western Australia are notable for not being allied with the Liberals in the state. The reason for this is mainly based around the fact that there are very few rural seats in Western Australia, with most of the political power based around the city of Perth. This forces the Nationals to compete more aggressively for their seats, and can't afford to be working with the Liberals, who they see as being too focused on urban issues and unwilling to protect rural industries. The party has 4 seats in the Western Australian Legislative Assembly and 3 seats in the Western Australian Legislative Council. The party is headed by Mia Davis, a member of the Legislative Assembly and soon to be leader of the opposition after the Liberals' horrific defeat in the recent election. Finally, we have the Advance SA Party. Advance SA is a centrist party based in South Australia, and based around party leader and member of the South Australian Legislative Assembly, John Darley. Darley was formerly a member of the Center Alliance, or SA Best, which is the name it uses for state politics. Darley left the Center Alliance after disagreements with the party, and formed his own party hoping to use that to promote his policies and get him elected. Now, the party, after failing to get any new members elected in the 2018 state election in South Australia, seems to have pretty much fizzled out. However, maybe I'm wrong, and soon we'll see Darley and his party take over South Australia and force everyone to like their Facebook page that they haven't updated in a year. So those are the smaller Australian political parties. They all fill ideological niches that the larger federal parties can't quite reach. But these niches aren't large enough for broad support, and they remain mostly as pressure groups for certain policy positions. I know some of the parties like Hinch's Justice Party and the Liberal Democrats formerly were represented at the federal level, so they are capable of moving up the political ladder, but for whatever reason right now they just have state-level offices. But I hope you enjoyed my dive into these smaller parties and their wacky antics. Next time I'll be working on Belgium. I've done a decent chunk of research. Reading about it is very, very complicated due to all the divisions, especially politically. And then after Belgium, I'll talk about Belgian political parties, which are just so ridiculous because pretty much every single party has two different parties you have to talk about because of all the divisions in the country, but we'll get there. And then I'll work on Belize, and then I'll do the end of the British Overseas Territories. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. You can contact me at whydocountriesexist@gmail.com for your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Take care. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.